Welcome back, guys, to the Beyond Condition podcast. Today, we have an episode centered around your post-show and how you may feel off the back of competing. So this is an episode that many of you will relate to, of course, wrapping up the UK season. And it's that time where it can be very emotional. It can feel pretty mentally tough. And of course, physiologically, you're going through many changes. And why do I feel like this post-show is quite a hard spot to be in, particularly for first timers when you haven't experienced this before? Now, being a seasoned competitor, let me tell you, it's still a tough time, but it changes because you're almost used to what to expect per se. Now, when you go through your competitor journey, it may be that as your preps go on, you're able to push a little bit more, you're able to climb the ranks, and that may then yield the reverse out being harder maybe than the first one, because of course you're progressing yourself within the sport. And there's no real answer to how you may be feeling. But what I'd like to do in today's episode is talk about why you may be feeling that way and some pointers into how this can become a little bit more of a not easier stage, but you're able to maybe accept it more if you can hear from me, okay, this may happen and this is what I would recommend you do. So I hope you enjoy the episode, of course. And if you have rounded out your season, congratulations, because whatever happened at your show, you stepped on stage and you competed, and there's so much achievement in that. As you know, my thought process, the success is you committing to this journey. And if you didn't make the stage for whatever reason that is, always remember the stage is there. It's always going to be there. And we still have opportunities to go back into a prep in the future when it's more viable to do that. So when we look at post-show, it's a crazy time for a lot of us. And like I say, it's different every time, but as you experience it, you can sort of get your head around what may happen. So physiologically, being in a prep, that can last, if you start to qualify for more shows or you elongate your season, it could be, my longest is 13 months. 13 months in a prep. Wow, what an extended period of time there. And that was because I competed earlier in the year and then I got invites, qualifications, etc. And that then elongated my prep. And it's a funny one really, because when I think back to that really long prep, you're so driven and in it, it's like you don't really think of anything outside of that, right? You want to continue progressing, maybe head for accolades, and you're living on the prep life. And you almost become fairly redundant to, okay, so I feel this way, I'm in a prep. And for me, when I get invites to finals, etc., it's like, okay, I'm going to get stuck in, I'm going to do it. But that can, of course, elongate your prep by months. So it's certainly a consideration around how then you set up your prep for maybe 6 to 8 months, or sometimes less. And then if that's added on, how that would affect you. Now, in a prep, there's plenty of adaptations. Hormonally, things change because you are heading deeper into a deficit. Your body fat levels are coming down and your body needs to adjust in order to survive, essentially. And as we move through a prep, we're looking to potentially increase our expenditure for the majority of you. We're looking to eat less food, and then the body is in survival mode. But then you combine this with potentially a lack of sleep, lots of different things that may occur in a prep into how you feel mentally. And when you then get to your show or the end of your season, you can experience that post-show dump. So I call it that because that's often what it feels like. And you always get a mixture of feelings after you compete. Even when you gain success, you can completely clean up in a season, but you're still going to have reflective thoughts and processing in your mind as to how your season went. We are human, remember. However, we do become very robotic in a prep, and we are very driven and focused. When you are in a prep, you're on a food plan or you're flexible dieting, right? So you're going to be potentially leading to eating very similar foods day in, day out. So then we go into the reverse out on the post-show period. And of course, you are adding in different foods that you haven't had for however long you've been in prep for. So that in itself is a huge consideration, because when you then put in the foods that are cooked in different oils, maybe you have different sauces, higher fats, higher carbs, you might have additives in there that you haven't had. The volume of food may well increase, almost certainly, when you go through this phase, and it's a lot for your body to handle. And what I always sort of liken it to, per se, is that in our mind, we know what we've done, what's coming, and what the different phases are. So we know, right, I'm in a prep, I'm following a plan. However, then we go into the reverse out in the post-show, and in your mind, you've ended your season, and however that looks like for you individually, your mind is aware, okay, this is what's going to happen. But then let's think about this logically. The body has not got a fucking clue what's going on. It's like, okay, so I'm on X amount of calories for my prep, and that decreases over time. I'm doing X amount of training. Then suddenly I'm having more food, less expenditure. What the hell's going on? And then, of course, you have the likelihood of things like water retention happening, digestive issues, energy fluctuations, and many, many other things that can occur with you psychologically during this time. So what I'm going to talk about is more the mental aspect of post-show, including your environment, how you plan out your reverse out into your post-show, and some of the things that you may come across. And like I say, hopefully you can resonate. Maybe it normalizes it to a certain degree, and it gives you some answers to if you're experiencing some of the things I think about. So let's start with when we come out of our show and the different foods that we're going to be eating. So your hunger hormones are also affected off the back of a prep. Now, it's often likened to that you are never going to be satiated. You're never going to feel satiated. You're never going to feel full. And your hunger is through the roof. So when we actually look at this, something for you to think about here is you've withstood a prep where you've been hungry probably most days throughout that time, right? You're running a deficit for an elongated period of time. Of course, the hunger can creep up, but you're pretty hungry throughout that time. So then why is it that we feel increased hunger off the back of the show? So the hunger hormones are at play here. But also, I truly believe that mentally, as competitors, it's a bit of a weird mythology, because we're eating on plan. As soon as the show's done, there's this post-show meal or treats or however we want to label it. And it's almost validated, particularly on social media and if you're around other competitors. And when I've thought about, recording this episode and my own journey as to why I was led to eating certain foods, why I was led to behaving in a certain way post-show, I really, really thought about this a lot. And it was like, before bodybuilding, I didn't have any problems with food. Food was food. I'd eat breakfast, lunch, dinner, have snacks, whatever, like a normal, in inverted commas, person. And I didn't have any disordered eating, any hang-ups around food. I just ate food for what it is, right? So then I come into bodybuilding and I go straight into a prep. And then off the back of the show, you speak with your coach and it's okay, you can go and have a meal out and have whatever you have. So I took that literally. And my post-show first time, I'll never forget it. It was pretty crazy. Now, what contributed heavily to that was the people around me wanting to gift me food, to spoil me and show me support for completing my prep and competing, and doing that for the first time. So everyone around you sort of sees that you've done this, and in essence, you disappear in front of their eyes. And of course, they want to feed you up. They want to show you care, love, etc. So what does that look like? Okay, so I'm going to buy Sarah some chocolate. I want to take her for a meal, etc., etc. And that first post-show meal, my ex-husband and I and my parents went to a pub. It was quite late on because I wasn't on stage till later on in the day. And Kieran said to me, have whatever you want from the menu. Now, like I said, in your prep, you're limited to certain foods to a certain degree, and you're not going to be eating, you know, what you'd see as food porn, burgers, chips, etc. And I looked at this menu and I thought, holy shit, I want everything. I want to taste everything because I haven't been able to. Now, this is why I talk about food enjoyment, doing this for the right reasons, committing to this journey for the bigger picture, and reframing how you see food. Now, of course, most of us will like a big juicy burger or a pizza, whatever it is. And that's pretty normal. But then this, when I looked at the menu, and this experience was like, whoa, you know, I want things that I don't even like. So he said, well, order what you want, and whatever you don't eat, we can either leave or I'll eat. And when we ordered the food, the waiter actually said, wow, like, who's having all this food? Is it just you four? And it was like, yeah. And I'll always remember, don't know why I remember this bit so much, but I saw sausage and mash on the menu. And I was like, I want sausage and mash. And I don't even like sausage and mash. But Kieran said, well, have it, even if you just want to have a bite of the sausage. And it was like, okay, I'm having the sausage and mash on top of several other items. So I ordered, it was probably like 4 starters, 3 mains, desserts, and a hot chocolate. And I remember we made our way through the food. And as I said, you don't really feel full. You're eating and eating and eating. And then it got to the end. It was pretty late. It was about 11 p.m. And the guy said, do you want your hot chocolate now? And I said, no, I don't want the hot chocolate. And he was like, well, you can take it away. And I was like, please, I don't want it. Take it away. I do not want the hot chocolate. And I always remember that. But that didn't get better, is probably the best word. The second season, I pretty much did the same again. But this time round, we ordered pizzas, and we had big, large pizzas. And then my mum had got us some bread and butter pudding, good old bread and butter pudding. And there was some other treats, like blondies and stuff like this. So had that on the way home from the show. Now, there were some commonalities between the first 2 seasons, but the second one was much worse for me digestion wise. So we ate it in the car on the way home, and it was a 4 or 5 hour journey home. And I remember we had to stop because my stomach swelled up. I was sweating. I felt dizzy. My blood pressure dropped. It was terrible, but I needed to get out the car and move. So we stopped at a petrol station. I remember doing laps around this petrol station, walking, and I went into the toilet, sat in the cubicle, and I thought, what the fuck have I done? Because of course, the volume of food that I ate, it all dumped in my digestive system, foods that I haven't had for so long, and it felt terrible. It was not a nice experience. And then after that second season, the third show, I actually was like, I don't want to experience that again. That is not nice. So I ended up going to a restaurant that we looked at before and went for an a la carte meal. So this is where I talk on the pod about planning your post-show meal and doing something nice for a palate experience. So like I say, everyone likes, or most people like, burger and chips, pizza, whatever it is. But is that something, my question to you, that you can have whenever in an off season, potentially, depending on what your plan is and if you have off-plan meals, etc. So my way of thinking is, would it be nicer to go for an a la carte meal with your family, sit down and experience a really nice meal, enjoy that meal, and like I say, focus on a palate experience? The a la carte vibe is pretty cool because you get, of course, smaller portions. However, the foods are going to be very rich in flavor, and that can cause a digestive kickback. So just think about that. So when I looked at the menu, I still went for chicken, I still went for some simple stuff, and I kept sauces on the side. It's easier to then control if you like it and how much you have on your food. So that third season felt so much better. I didn't get the repercussions. I had a really nice 3-course meal. And then the following day, I was able to then go out for another meal for lunch. I had a cheese omelette for breakfast. For some reason, I always like a cheese omelette post-show if I can get one. It's just the cheese, the whole eggs, because it's often we have egg whites in a prep, and that experience. And then had a nice lunch. And by God, the difference in how I felt, both psychologically and physiologically. And then I could go into my reverse out and my off season. The 4th season was when I did plenty of shows across that really long prep. There was a mixture of tactics there because, of course, I was competing back to back. So ordinarily, if you're competing back to back and the shows are in close proximity, it doesn't enable you to do as much as maybe you would if it's your last show. So, i.e., going for a meal out and sort of having what you want to a certain degree. But I remember when I won the last show, the Miss Universe show, we all went for a meal. And I've spoken about this on the pod before. Everyone was like having so much stuff. And I was like, I feel really uncomfortable because I just wanted to have my a la carte meal, but we went to like a grill and I like my food piping hot. And I remember I ordered a chicken burger and it came out like lukewarm. So I had to send it back, and we're in Mexico and I'm thinking everyone's going to be like, can you just eat it? But for me, the post-show experience is to sit down with those that you love and really enjoy that. So I got it reheated and I just had a chicken burger and some sides and bits and bobs with everyone else. But what I'd like to talk about here is that staying in your own lane post-show is super important. Now, the likelihood that you're going to get pulled into seeing other people do different things if you're with other competitors post-show and directly after you compete is high. It's very, very common that people are going to be wanting to eat those treat type foods. So arming yourself with this strength that you've exhibited in your prep to stay in your own lane and stick to the plan that's been outlined with you and your coach is super important. Now, depending on your coach will depend on what the plan is, of course. And some coaches are going to say, have what you want, which is what I had at the start of my competitive journey. Some coaches will say, okay, so here's an outline of, you know, have something from this restaurant, or maybe have around this amount of calories, or there can be discussions around that. So this is super important that you have these communications with your coach. Now, when we do go into this period of time, remembering that we've had very similar foods for an extended period of time, when you start to put these foods in, like I said, it's very tough for your digestive system. And this is where you can get that kickback, where you can get a swollen stomach, you can feel very unwell, your energy levels can be affected, and actually your desire for the food was so heightened that when you actually eat it, if you eat past feeling good on the food, being able to digest it, when you go past that, that's when the body is kicking back and going, whoa, what is this food? So not only what is this food, but like I touched on, the volume of food. So if you eat a lot, where does that go? That goes into your stomach, your body's working to digest that, and that's going to contribute to that big dip in energy because your body's having to work like overdrive to try and digest these foods. So it's different foods and then the volume of foods as well. And that's where I liken it to you've restrained yourself for your whole prep. So why is it that it's almost validated that we eat in excess after our show? So it does link into people wanting to obviously show you love, give you food because you're leaner than they've maybe seen you before, etc., etc. But that then, I believe for myself, validated it in my own mind. Well, I've done my show. I'll eat as much as I want. And then when you have the hunger hormones at play, where they are pretty skewed, depending, of course, on how long you've prepped for and how much you've pushed in your prep, then not feeling full gives you that almost mixed message that, okay, well, I'll keep eating. And of course, when the world is your lobster and you can eat whatever you want, you've told yourself, I've done really well, I'm going to reward myself with food. Where does it then stop? And this is me talking from experience. And if this has happened to you, we've got the opportunity to learn here. And it probably happens to 99% of competitors. But I'd like to try and highlight in this episode ways that we can plan and factor this in to still help you feel mentally and physiologically a little bit more stable, a bit more positive around this, and then to set you up for your growth phase or maintenance phase, wherever you're heading after you compete. So let's take it back to the day of the show, but backstage. Now, I've had plenty of experiences where people have offered me lots and lots of different foods, and some federations do have food delivered and you get that included. So UKUP, they get pizzas brought in, you can have that. There's obviously going to be shops around you. Your family or friends may come and support you. You might not have seen them for a while and they bring you goodies. Of course, most of us will look at buying things like bakes, different things that we definitely haven't had in our prep. So what I would look to do when I structure it, and this is the advice when I work backstage at shows. So in the example of a pizza that's being delivered from Domino's, so is that something that you can access pretty much at any place in the world? Yes, it is. Are you going into an off season where you could factor that in? Potentially. So is that what you want to have post-show? If it is, and I've obviously had people say to me, but I want that. If you like cold pizza that's been sat out and other people have been touching it and it's there open and, you know, that's what you want to have and your coach is cool with it, have it. But what I would say is, would you prefer to hold on for a little bit longer and go to a nice restaurant, order what you want to have, be in control of the hygiene of the food, and also be able to eat in an environment where your loved ones are with you? You can sit down, have a nice drink, relax, and really make memories off the back of your prep. Now, of course, maybe you have one slice of pizza, then you go for a meal. Again, this is up to you, but this is just things that I have thought about and that I wanted to share with you guys. So when we then look at maybe other competitors backstage, you've all come off stage, you've competed, the show is done. The likelihood that other people are going to offer you things are high. If you've made friends, if you've spoken with other competitors, it's nice for you to be sharing little experiences on your show day. So again, I would relate this back to, so things that you can get in Tesco all year round. So Reese's peanut butter cups maybe, or a bar of dairy milk, something like this. Can you factor that into your post-show? More than likely, yes. So would you prefer maybe to have a dessert at the meal out that you wouldn't be able to make yourself and you maybe can't get access to ordinarily, and it would be more like a true off plan? So it's something that's very different to what you've maybe had before, or something that you know you like that you've had way back when and you'd like to experience that again. So I would say there's a consideration around that. If you're going to get something like a bake and that's factored in, then perhaps you could, if you want to, take that to have backstage, and then you could go for a starter and a main, or you can save the bake to have as a dessert. That's some thought processes around backstage and what you might experience. Now, if this is your first time or you're not particularly a standoffish person, maybe you like to make friends and you can be easily led to pleasing others. So essentially external pressure. That happens to a lot of us, and that happened to me in my first few seasons. I wanted to make friends. I wanted to take part. But if you can build a bit more resilience away from that, so just say to people, oh, I'm okay, thank you, I'm going for a really nice meal, that can really help. Because if you say that to another competitor and they try and push you to have, oh, just have a little bit, I would say, I'm absolutely fine. I'm not going to have that because I'm having the meal. But an extension of that is that if you are worried about this and you don't feel confident enough to say no, and thank you, of course, then you can even say that you've got a gluten intolerance or something along these lines. A fictitious way to just see this through for yourself and to stay in your own lane if you're not too good at dealing with external pressure. And I'm not saying and advocating that you lie, but it's a really easy way to say, I cannot have that because I'm, gluten or dairy sensitive or anything like that, just to get your way around it if you suddenly feel extreme amounts of pressure. Because you might go into the show and think, I'm going to be fine off the back of it. And then you experience this pressure and then you're like a deer in headlights. You may listen to this podcast and then go, I'm just going to pull that card because it just gets me out of this sticky scenario. So another thought process that you could take if you're not happy with dealing with confrontation. Now, a big factor on the lead up to a show is what you're doing, what you're looking at, what you're experiencing in your prep that's setting you up for your reverse out and your off season. If you're constantly looking at food on social media, if you're speaking with other competitors about what foods you can't wait to have post show, and if that's empowered and you all start to get in these mindsets, naturally, this is going to contribute heavily to your post-show experience. If you build up the foods that you haven't had in your mind as to how delicious they are, how hard you've worked and how much you deserve them, then of course, you're essentially manifesting that you should have these foods and you've acknowledged that you deserve these foods after your show. Now, that's not me saying that you shouldn't have different foods as you reverse out and go into your off season and experience off plan. Of course, it's nice to do that, like I've already said. But if you find yourself almost winding yourself up and thinking these foods are going to be so delicious, that won't only contribute to you finding prep harder potentially mentally, but that could lead to you having these experiences that I've spoken about that I have post-show, but also the elements of potential food disorders, disordered eating, binging, the binge restrict cycle. That's high on the radar after a show if you haven't experienced a prep before, particularly being right down to show condition. If that's new to you, then the likelihood that you're going to want to eat these foods and the contribution of social media and potentially other athletes, this could spiral into you ending up with disordered eating patterns or an affected relationship with food. And you see it a lot on social media where fitness influencers will say, if you bodybuild, then you are going to have a negative relationship with food. But there's rarely much education behind that. So what are we doing as bodybuilders and why are we looking to compete? That's the question that always needs to be answered by yourself. Why are you getting into this sport and what are you looking to achieve? So there is going to need to be a restricted diet in place. There is going to need to be potentially pretty high levels of training, which will potentially, again, increase closer to the show. So your cardio. There's going to be weight training every week. There's going to be saying no to certain things, whether that's food, drink, social occasions, whatever you come across. There's going to be more than likely a bulletproof structure in place, and you are committing to the life of a bodybuilder. So does that affect your relationship with food? Yes, it certainly does. But again, let's reframe this. Before this journey, if you were like me and you didn't have much awareness of food and what food has in it, what food is for, then you're entering a bodybuilding prep. Hopefully you'll get intuition and education around what foods help with your energy levels, with your micronutrient profile, with your satiety, with your digestion. Of course, the list goes on. But if you're not, then you're given a food plan and it's got XYZ foods on. Maybe some of those foods you don't really like. So then you live on these foods for an extended period of time. And that may affect your relationship with food. That may contribute to you wanting to eat foods that you would have eaten before becoming a bodybuilder, because you've been on a restrictive plan. That can then lead to you feeling pretty hard done by almost, and thinking, why can't I have these foods? So this is where I say getting into it and understanding your why. So when you see on social media, bodybuilders all have disordered eating, etc., etc. This is something Sonia and I spoke on the podcast about with disordered eating and food disorders, the differences there. So Sonia and I agree to a certain degree. Really, you almost need to eat in a disordered way to ensure that you manage everything in your life that contributes to your prep alongside eating in a certain way. So that is meal timings, meal quantities, weighing your foods, probably eating at similar times of the day. And this does facilitate almost those disordered ways of thinking. So what food do I need to have? I need to cook it in a certain way. I want to make this as palatable as possible, per se. And then you've got that rigid time across the day where you eat at those certain times. And like I say, weighing your food. So this can easily open up to disordered ways of eating and your relationship with food. However, if, of course, you can look at why you are doing this and get the education as to what foods are going to do and how that's going to help you adhere to your prep and potentially keep your micronutrients up, keep your gut health as good as possible. Many health considerations where we can do this. It's a funny way to frame it, but as healthy as possible. Because let's face it, a bodybuilding prep is not healthy. It can be pretty extreme. So the relationship with food, it's then, okay, so is it going to be affected? Yes, if I've eaten in a completely different way before becoming a bodybuilder, and then I've changed into a food plan, flexible dieting, whatever it is, but you are restricting. But this process, hopefully you have a coach that you're able to talk to. So gaining that experience, but also asking questions. And if you can, having a level of input into your food plan. Now, there's going to be points in your prep, particularly close to the show, where it's more than likely going to be, okay, here's your plan, just follow it and do the do. And there's going to be coaches that maybe don't answer questions about food to the level that you'd like to understand them to, and that just deliver you a food plan and not really any explanation into that. So if that style of coaching is what you experience and you're happy with that, all good. But if you're a question asker, if you want to learn more, and that's going to help your relationship with food and your understanding, and of course, coming into the post-show period, then I would say you look for a coach that matches that. Now, I've certainly felt like as the seasons have gone on and I felt more confident to ask questions and actually have input into planning my reverse out on my post-show period of time, it certainly enabled me to feel more confident because again, we've followed a plan for however many months. So having a plan for that period is certainly something to think about. Now, when you go into your reverse out, earlier I touched on that there may be amendments to your training. So a reduction in calorie expenditure, potentially all of your cardio may be removed. Depending on your prep and your coach, how it's been, how you feel, you may have a deload or a period of time away from the gym. So let's look at how this may affect you. So the structure has been nailed. And if you then remove your structure, because if you're reducing your expenditure, potentially having some time off the gym, this can contribute to you feeling pretty lost during this time. So a really good way to look at planning this is those slots where you would do your cardio or your gym or your activities towards your prep. You can replace that with something else. So what I do is I swap the cardio out for going for a walk. So a walk can be nice, slow pace. If you're in that recovery period, you can go out, enjoy some fresh air. You can go with someone, or you can put your headphones in, or a podcast, or whatever you want to do. And you can take your time rather than going in to, of course, get on the stepper or whatever bit of cardio it is and go to war. No, we can't say that. We are not going to war. But you get my drift, because you are going through that recovery phase. And then if you've got those additional time slots, looking at things that can fill those time slots that keep you feeling like there is purpose outside of what you would have done in a prep. So this relates into when I talk about preps and still doing hobbies. This is a great idea, because what you can then do is continue those hobbies. So sedentary hobbies are cool, or even hobbies that are more active. You can, when you reverse out and recover more, put more energy into it and maybe enjoy it more because you feel more present and you're able to put a little bit more energy into it and enjoy that from that perspective. So carrying over those hobbies. When we look at that structure being so rigid for you to get all your tasks in, all of those tasks that contribute, most of them can be replaced. Things like your posing practice, you can still do posing practice if you want to as you head into your off season. I personally have a bit of time off. I do my check-ins once a week, but I have some time off posing practice, mainly for my back and the chronic back condition I have. You know, I need to try and recover and have some time off the contortionist vibe. But also I find that after the show, and if you've done multiple shows, you can feel very deflated. And the last things you want to do is put your heels on, put your bikini on and do posing rounds. Because on the lead up to a show, you may be checking in 2 or 3 times daily. And that does take a bit of a toll psychologically. And it's like, that's cool. I can have a bit of time to be able to just let the dust settle and go back to it when I feel better. So that's something that maybe you need to replace as well. Now, if you do your posing practice off the back of a gym session when you've got a bit of a pump, you could maybe swap that for doing some yoga while you're there. Or if a friend could meet you at the gym and you have a coffee or something like this is a really nice thing to replace that with, again, enabling you to still have that structure so you don't feel too lost. Because that's certainly what a lot of people feel. It's lost. The goal has been removed, which is the big part here. You've been tunnel vision for your prep. You've probably faced plenty of challenges. Maybe you've got to the point where you can literally hardly put one foot in front of the other, and you've really had to dig for yourself to get to stage. So then it's like the next day after your show, whoa, it's hit me like a ton of bricks. My goal is removed. And also the contribution of how you got on at the show, reflecting on that. And it's a whole new world of emotions. So something else that I personally do, the morning after the show, when I get up, I go for a walk. So you're often going to get social media messages, maybe messages from friends and family. Maybe you want to do a post about how the show went. I take myself off for a walk, spend an hour to an hour and a half, again facilitating my normal structure, but it also gives me time to decompress alone and just be able to gather my thoughts, reply to messages, do a post, maybe listen to some music, something different to maybe what you've been listening to in your sessions or when you're doing posing practice, and just let yourself take it all in. And even if you win a show, you're still going to have reflective thoughts. Let me tell you, when you win, you still think, could I have done better? Could anything have been a little bit better or a bit more fine-tuned? What can I learn here? So there's still a period of processing, of course. Now, you're probably going to feel pretty tired off the back of your show or your season. I say probably because sometimes you feel pretty wired and you almost skip that and you live on adrenaline maybe for the next couple of days, and then it may kick in. but most of us are going to feel pretty tired the next day. So if you feel good about doing that, getting out for a walk, just decompressing a little bit, getting out in the fresh air, that can help just set you up for the day. If you've had a post-show meal and it's different foods, you still feel pretty full, and it's like, well, I've had foods that I haven't had for a while. Sometimes just getting out and getting some steps, getting some movement can help digestion and can help give you a bit of mental clarity during this really, really acute period of time. Of course, if you want to be around other people and you'd like to invite them out for the walk, then why not? But I just personally feel a bit of time to myself is what I need to be able to just have that time. And for, a few weeks, you feel like the stuffing's been knocked out of you for the majority of us. You feel like maybe you don't want to communicate with people around you. You feel like everything is so much more effort. And then you're like, but in prep, I was cool. I was answering messages. I was doing stories. I was doing posts. I'm getting lean. I'm feeling good. Now I'm like, I don't want to talk to anyone. And that is, of course, that emotional roller coaster we can go through, because like I say, the goal is removed. And then it's like, I need time. And that's where the processing takes place. So getting yourself out for a walk that morning after can allow you to start that process. Then you consider that social battery. Now, I'm social, right? I like to spend time with people from my inner circle. I want to thank people that have supported me, but I still need time after a show to decompress and process what's just happened and just reflect on the whole prep. Because when you're in a prep, particularly when you get close to the show, you don't often recall what you've even done. You can get to the show the next day, you think, has that just happened? This is madness. I can't almost recollect the last 6 weeks. And you're not alone if you feel like that. So then let's spin it on. If you don't place and you're expecting to place. Now, the contributions to that, of course, are going to be the expectations you place on yourself. Potentially your coach is saying that you're going to win, which I myself, that does upset me to a certain degree, because if your coach is telling you you should win before they've seen the lineup, before they've seen the standard at the show, before maybe they've even peaked you for the show, because as we know, there can be things go wrong in a peak, that then adds a ton of pressure, because you don't know who's going to turn up. You never really know. And that in itself is a pressure that I don't believe, as a coach myself and a competitor, that we need. And then there's that, almost before you go into your show, you're already thinking, if I don't win, that's me letting my coach down, that's me failing. And that's not nice for anyone to experience in any area of life. You don't want to feel like a failure, because you've still competed. You've done a whole fucking prep. You've got to stage. You've done everything you can to get to stage. So why isn't that celebrated? And I really like how my coach, Tom, frames it. He says, we're going for an outing. So you've done the journey. You've done everything in your power. Now we go out to exhibit your best physique and we have a great day. And let me tell you, the element of pressure that is dropped from having that mindset is humongous. And luckily, my coach before was exactly the same. Even when I started to win shows, there was never pressure to win the consecutive shows after that, because it's supporting the athlete for what they're actually doing and not putting pressure on the athlete to get an accolade when there's no real merit to being able to predict that, because like I say, you don't know who's going to turn up. There is elements of when you win shows, you want to win the rest of your season. You want to keep winning, right? You taste it. You want the gold every time. And when you compete and you win, and then I had this after the first show I won, the second show after that of that season, I came second. And I truly believe that was one of my best, probably actually my best lessons as a competitor, because I knew that it wasn't, I could turn up to every show and win because I'd won one. You're there to work and you're there to fight, and you never know who's going to turn up. And this then feeds into being a sportsman and that potentially affecting your post-show period. If you go in to win and you don't, you can still be a good sportsman and you can still act with integrity because somebody else has won. You haven't taken the gold, but somebody's got to take the gold. If you haven't won, if you can try to celebrate their success, and even if you feel like you should have beaten them, I would say keep that to yourself and speak to your coach after the show. Look at your stage shots and speak with your coach who's able to look at who you were competing against, and you can have a discussion behind closed doors. If this is exacerbated and your coach is maybe there on the day, or you speak to them on the phone, maybe your supporters are in the audience and they're all saying you should have won, it's not what we came for, that's not fair, that could lead to your post-show being very difficult in that acute period. That could end up you eating more because you're pissed off. That could end up you maybe having alcohol that you maybe haven't had. You could do certain things that are emotionally led because you feel like a failure, or you feel pissed off, or people are cheerleading. That shouldn't have happened. And then that can contribute to you feeling like you go into this space and maybe you had your plan in place and you go away from the plan because emotionally you're affected by your placing. And this is where the athlete mindset kicks in. And I really, really love the opportunity with both of my coaches to talk about this behind closed doors. It may have been that someone won, you didn't, and actually looking at the physiques, the stage shots, and potentially your coach in the audience, that you're confused by the placing. But having this time to actually talk about it, look at it logically, and then not react emotionally on that day will help your experience. Because it's very easy to lash out on social media if you feel like your placing is not fair, to maybe lash out to your loved ones, to isolate yourself. And then that contributes to this dark place that can be experienced off the back of your show. And what I would say to your supporters beforehand, ideally, is I just want to compete, enjoy it. If I don't win, then I want you there to support, but I may need a bit of time to process what's happened. And them saying things like, you should have won and you look the best on stage, particularly if they're not from a bodybuilding aspect, their opinions are going to be heavily tied to them loving you, supporting you, and maybe the blinkers are on to a certain degree, and they think you look the best because in their eyes, you are the best. You should win because they've seen what you've put into the prep. And furthering on from that, remember, guys, what you've put into your prep, the judges don't know that. So what you've had to potentially, what we would call sacrifice, which is a tricky word for me because I always feel like it's a choice to do a prep. And yes, we have to say no and change how our lifestyle is, but that is a choice. So whether or not we call it a sacrifice, but that sort of mindset in regards to what you've had to put in. The judges are just looking at the physiques on stage. So if you've lost 8 stone to get to stage, or you've had a family member pass away, or you've had some big challenges, they don't know that. So then if you let that bleed into the period after the show where you go, well, I did X, Y, and Z, why didn't I place? Again, you can end up feeling mentally, well, I've done all of that and I have not got any recognition from that. So the recognition I would recommend that you look for is internal validation. What you have done to get to stage is an intrinsic feeling. And really, only you know how you feel and what you had to do to overcome challenges. People that are close to you will see it, but it's very intrinsic to you. So I would let that add value to what you've achieved, rather than that make you feel like you almost should suddenly rewrite your whole structure, eat lots of different foods that you're not used to, and go into this different behavioral pattern post-show. Because yes, we all need to contribute many, many things to a prep. But again, this being a choice and you trying to favorably come out of your prep and be able to, set yourself up for your next phase, however that looks. If we come too far away from what our plan is and we then deviate, go off track, mentally you don't feel great, but also you've got those physiological adaptations that have happened, and then those adaptations that are trying to occur as you bring more food in and you reduce your expenditure. So it's certainly a consideration to the thought processes you may be having from what you put into your prep to how you behave after you compete. Now, it's certainly not out the realms of possibility that you're going to feel pretty sorry for yourself. And I do not say that flippantly, because I've been there. I've felt sorry for myself, that I've had to do a prep, that I've had to say no, that I've had to feel like shit for months. But as I've gone on through this journey, as I've gained experience of preps and different phases through my bodybuilding journey, I've realized that we always have a choice to do this. And if we let that bleed into our mindset, it can become a very lonely spot. You can go through so many different emotions where you just feel like, why do I have to do this? Why aren't other people doing this? And you may not have these thought processes, but it's something to think about alongside what I've already touched on. Now, I've spoken a lot about having a plan post-show. So this is where the importance of your coach is paramount to this period, not only for a plan, but support mentally, because you've built up a relationship in your prep. Your coach knows your body much more than potentially when you started, or if you've been with a coach for multiple seasons, they are able to assess your physique. They maybe even guess what's going to happen with your physique through the certain stages. And when you reverse out, if this is your first time and you try and go it alone, this is not what I would recommend in any way, shape, or form. Those physiological adaptations are not something that you know about, you've probably never felt or experienced before. And a lot of people will come away from a coach post-show because of the financial element. So what I'd recommend is that when you look to embark on a prep, that you ensure, if possible, that you have the finances to allow for a coach post-show. I sometimes almost feel like we need a coach post-show more than in the prep, because in the prep, you're focused on the show, you're sticking to a plan, and you've got that unlimited drive. It's like, well, I've got the show, I'm going to push, I'm going to push, I'm going to push. So then when that goal is removed, when you're able to eat off plan, when your expenditure reduces, you can feel in no man's land. So having a coach that can help you through this period of time is imperative, because if you don't know about bodybuilding, how will you know what's happening? If you end up holding some water post-show, which the likelihood is pretty high when you're putting different foods in, if you have digestive issues, if your menstrual cycle has stopped, if your sleep is affected, your coach can help you with this. I really, really feel that this is so, so important, and it's often overlooked because we maybe think, well, I've done the show, I don't need a coach. And on that note, when we talk about sleep, the sleep deprivation, what happens when we're deprived of sleep? We look to potentially look for foods that are going to help that. We try to rationalize it in our own mind that, okay, I'm not going to sleep because I'm in a prep. we think that after the show, things like sleep are going to maybe go straight back to normal. And if this has been affected, like I say, not everyone has effects to their sleep. Some people sleep through a prep and they're still getting a good amount. But if you're someone like myself that maybe gets to 3 or 4 hours sleep a night in a prep, off the back of that, it takes a long period of time for that to return to what we would maybe label as a normal sleep pattern. So keeping that structure there and letting your coach help you with this is super, super important. So here we would look to keep sleep times around the same. We'd still look at supplementation and keeping a good bedtime routine. So as we go through this post-show period, and you may think, okay, it's not going to take too long for me to recover, but it can take a lot longer than you would think. Like I said right at the start, depending on how much you've pushed, how long you have prepped for. So don't be surprised if potentially at 8 weeks post-show, you have some sort of physiological response as maybe your food is going up or you incorporate an off-plan meal that you haven't experienced for, since before your prep, or things have happened in your home life, or sleep's not back on track. Maybe your menstrual cycle still isn't back, all of these things. You can still get a kickback 8 weeks later, even longer than that. And you think, why is this happening? I've done my prep, food's in a good spot, sleep is getting better, my expenditure's reduced. I'm not expecting this. Why is this happening? But what we must remember is in a prep, we've spent a long, long period of time in a deficit. So you do have many, many effects to contend with. And that includes organ health. That includes things that you can pick up on a blood test. So this is where I would recommend that you look to get your bloods done. Now, a blood panel from somewhere like MedChecks, yes, again, it is another expense, but it's something that I would factor in. This allows you to see exactly what's happening, and you can get a full breakdown and see if you have got any knock-on effects from your prep. This is very, very important because we're then able to get actual data that is giving us viable education into exactly what's happening to you as an athlete. And then if there are kickbacks, you can lean on those bloods to give you some answers to maybe what's going on. But this is where having that coach during this time is super, super important, because you can go back and forth and get a good understanding into what's going on. And of course, you can try different methods. And this is also where there's a big, big relevance on asking questions. So this is where I'm going to wrap it up today in the sort of questions that you may want to ask your coach about your post-show period. So ideally, you've got a plan in place, so you know exactly what's happening with potentially the food increases, or a bit of an outline, what's going to happen with your training, if you're going to incorporate off-plan, this type of stuff. But the questions and the feedback that you need to give, ideally, if you've got a coach that's there to fully support this phase, anything that comes up, you want to be asking questions about. So if your menstrual cycle hasn't returned and your coach hasn't asked you, I would let your coach know. I would give feedback on things like your sleep and your day-to-day energy. I would ask questions about supplementation, if that's going to stay the same or if there's additional supplementation to use. I would ask for input into off-plan meals, socializing, and anything of that nature. If you feel it in a certain way, I would describe that and ask for a call if you need to, because that can really help you to speak with your coach face-to-face and offload exactly how you're feeling. So if you're having certain thought processes, if you're feeling really low on energy and very down, please lean on your coach and those closest to you if possible. Because if you don't, this can very, very easily spiral into you feeling very low and almost like what you'd associate with a depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, where you've had this goal, it's gone, and then of course you then go into okay, the goal's gone, and why do I feel this way? That's the label of this podcast, right? Why do I feel like this post-show? So leaning on your coach, but giving details. I didn't give that enough when I first started out because I didn't want to bother my coach. I'd keep it all inside. I wouldn't speak to anyone, and I would, there was times where I'd be in the gym and I'd just burst into tears crying while I'm training, because I needed to speak to someone and allow someone to support me, because I was having so many thoughts and feelings and, reflections of the season, what had happened in my prep, etc., that I was very, very lonely during these times, and it's very tough. So leaning on those close ones is super important here, because in essence, a problem shared is a problem halved. And also, your coach is more than likely going to be able to give you an objective opinion and give you things to think about to enable you to come through this phase and also to resonate with them. So I am feeling this way. And then your coach can say, okay, so have you thought about it like this? Or have you tried this? And that is amazing, because it gives you that opportunity to think about it in a very different way. Remember, if you're suffering inside, it's exacerbated. And if you're thinking about many, many different parts of your life off the back of your prep, which can happen, doing this alone will make it feel tougher. And that support can really help you ride this period of time out to be able to feel like you've still got that support during this phase, because it's not all about getting lean and it's not all about competing. It's about what happens either side of that, because everything is so focused on that day. So ask questions. If you feel like your relationship with scale weight or food or any of those things that have a high probability of occurring, speak to your coach. If you're worried about the scales going up, if you're worried about how your physique is looking, ask them, what do they think? Is there any ideas of what I should expect in this period of time? Gain that knowledge and education, and that certainly will help you understand this phase that little bit more. So hopefully my rambles today will help resonate with you guys, and potentially as you come through this post-show period, give you a little bit more insight into what may be occurring. And of course, if anyone wants to message me on Instagram or share this on their story, share this with a friend, if that is going to help them, then I really do appreciate it. And of course, I look forward to speaking to you all next week.